With the Senate back in session, Republicans are increasingly sending the signal in a kind of unified way that basically, we've done our part, get back to work, America, we wash our hands of this. As Jim Newell writes in Slate, quote, in terms of additional legislation that might support a shattered nation, the Senate Republican caucus is on a self-described pause right now that is set to expire on, well, no one can really say. That is not how Democrats are dealing with this pandemic. They've got tons of plans for a new round of legislation. And here to talk with me about those plans, the Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer. Senator, I wanted to start with something that one of your Republican colleagues said today about the prospect of another kind of rescue package, a new CARES Act. And this is Senator John Kennedy, a witty guy in the Republican caucus from Louisiana. He was asked about another round of stimulus checks. He said, well, people in hell want ice water, too. Like Crimea River. What do you make of that?
These guys are just appalling, Chris. We have 30 million people unemployed. We have people every day losing their jobs, small businesses going out of business. People can't feed their children and themselves. And these guys say, pause. You know who they remind me of? Herbert Hoover. When we were on the edge of a potential depression, Herbert Hoover said, let's do nothing. That's what these guys are saying. And doing nothing could well create the second Great Depression. We need help, and help quickly. We Democrats in the House and Senate are working on a big, bold, strong package that will deal with so many of the problems we face. I mean, you know, Mitch McConnell comes up with this idea that we should let state and local governments go bankrupt. This is not an abstract concept, Mitch. These are firefighters who protect us, bus drivers who drive the buses, people who work in healthcare, food safety inspectors. These are the people who would be thrown out of work through no fault of their own. In fact, 1 million people in state and local governments lost their job. We need money to help them keep working. We need money to provide food for people so they don't have to watch their children go hungry. We need money to get our schools going again. We need so many different things. We need heroes pay. For those on the front lines who are undergoing so many extra expenses and are asked to sacrifice so much. This idea that we should do nothing and wait and see. Well, I'd like Mitch McConnell and his Republican friends, Mr. Kennedy, to go tell a mom who can't feed her kids, let's wait and see what happens in a few weeks. To tell a small business person who has spent 10 years building up that restaurant or that nail salon or that small manufacturing business and is ready to go out of business and desperately needs help. Let's wait and see what happens. It is utterly appalling. It is like Herbert Hoover. We Democrats are going to force those Republicans, like we did last time when they didn't want to do much, to take big, bold action because the nation needs it and the people demand it.
How much do you think it's a negotiating position that they're essentially bluffing because they want to essentially sort of anchor the negotiations in nothing, and then there'll be some horse trading? Whereas if they come out and they say, yeah, we want to do big stuff too, then they give away leverage. And how much do you think they really do think, like, we've kind of done what we can do?
Yeah, Chris, don't underestimate the hold that these hard right ideologues, these very, very wealthy people who are doing just fine, by the way. Stock market's going up because they make sure, that the Federal Reserve bolsters the markets. But don't underestimate the hold that these very wealthy people who control a lot of the Republican Party, if not all of it these days, have on these senators. They don't want any government spending. They don't give a hoot about what happens to average people. It hurts. It's going to hurt them, but they're so blinded by their ideology, both the benefactors of the Republican Party and the Republican senators themselves, that they can't get away from it. They are caught in a knot. The days of a moderate, thoughtful, compromising Republican and Senate are just about over. Look what they do to Mitt Romney when he once in a while breaks from them,
One of the priorities, I think, for both the benefactors of the party and Mitch McConnell and others is this idea of some kind of liability indemnification, right? That employers should be statutorily shielded from any civil suits if they, say, open up a factory or they open up a workplace and people come and get sick. What do you think of that? It seems to me that McConnell is already setting that up as like a must-have for him in the negotiation that you and he, I think, will ultimately have.
Right. Well, the bottom line is very simple. They want to say if a employer, a boss, says to a worker, you got to sit next to someone who has COVID or has all the signs of COVID without any protective equipment, and you're absolved from any liability, bull. That should not happen, and it will not happen. McConnell got stuck. He first said, let the states and localities go bankrupt. So he knew that was wrong, but he still doesn't want to really help them. So he tries to put this thing out there, which helps the big corporate bosses and nobody else. It's not going to stand. Just like last time when he said, oh, we will only do these two things in the first COVID bill, or he said we're only going to do PPP and not help minorities and not help unbanked people in the second one. He's going to have to fold. And you know why? Because the country is on our side. This idea that the Republicans have, let the private sector solve the problem, is terribly out of date. And when Democrats propose big, bold action by the federal government, we're backed up by most of the people.